In 1961, the Macau government gave its casino monopoly to Stanley Ho. Over the next 40 years, he gave them what they wanted and infiltrated every part of the Macanese economy. That casino and the underworld crime rings it fostered brought crime, corruption, and violence to Macau. In this video, what a long-running casino monopoly did for Macau. I did my last video on Macau a long time ago. So long ago, I no longer have the script for that video. Wow, this channel is old. Anyway, Macau sits at the mouth of the Pearl River Delta, about 60 kilometers west of Hong Kong. It is made up of three smaller areas, Macau, Taipa, and Koloani. Those three have changed a lot thanks to the extensive use of reclaimed land. Macau used to be an isthmus, but is now a peninsula connected to the mainland. Taipa and Koloani used to be separate, but are now merged into one big island. Altogether, Macau is about 32.9 square kilometers large, or about half the size of Manhattan. Today, about 680,000 people live in Macau, making it one of the world's most densely populated places. Macau dates back to the Ming Dynasty in 1557, when the Portuguese started it as a regional trading post, re-exporting textiles and garments from China. Basically, from its foundation, there had been gambling in Macau and its neighboring city of Canton, or Guangzhou today. Gambling places called fantan houses quickly popped up despite being illegal. Fantan is a game of chance long played in Chinese history. The dealer puts some buttons underneath a bowl. 4 players then bet on the number under the bowl divided by 4. It's simple to play, requiring only a few buttons or stones. Gambling attracted criminal elements. Throughout the 1700s, visitors reported murders, fighting, robbery, brothels, and drinking. A common trick was to get a foreign sailor drunk with cheap Chinese alcohol and then rob them blind. The fantan houses closely integrated with human trafficking. Chinese from the mainland would come to Macau to gamble, fall into huge debt, and thus be forced to work their way out of it as exported labor. Then in 1842, China lost the First Opium War. Under the unequal Treaty of Nanking, the British gained control over nearby Hong Kong. The Qing also had to open 5 new trading ports: Shanghai, Guangzhou, Ningbo, Fuzhou, and Xiamen. Hong Kong's subsequent rise as a global trading center triggered Macau's decline in the same and forced them to diversify their economy. But Hong Kong also helped feed the Portuguese colony with tourists and gamblers. In the late 1840s, Macau Governor Ferreira do Amaral unilaterally declared Macau a Portuguese colony. He expelled the Chinese from Macau, occupied part of the nearby island of Taipa, and stopped paying rents to the Chinese. To raise revenues, the governor had his government sell licenses for certain economic activities like opium trading, pork trading, and gambling. In 1847, Macau started selling licenses for the Chinese lottery, which still runs today. 2 years later, in 1849, they sold an exclusive license to run fantan gambling houses. Anyway, Governor Ferreira do Amaral's vigorous actions did make him a few enemies. One morning in August 1849, he went for a horse ride. Then a group of Chinese attacked him, dragging him off his horse and cutting off his head. He did not survive that, and his death would trigger a brief military confrontation between Portugal and China, the Pasiliao incident. Macau boasts a long line of gambling tycoons, the first of which was Lu Gao. The man lived a wild life. Born in Guangdong in 1848, he immigrated to Macau at about 9 years old. By his 20s, Lu had made a sizable fortune in monopoly pork trading, banking, and opium. He and his family ran several gambling houses in Macau, a business deeply intertwined with their opium businesses. However, Lu lost the biggest gamble of them all. In 1897, Lu won an exclusive gambling license in Guangzhou. This required him to pay a massive advance to the government, about 2 million silver taels. Then suddenly, in 1900, the Viceroy Liang Guang, the Qing official in charge of the Guangdong and Guangxi areas, banned all forms of gambling, yet he did not lift Lu's debt for a license now worth nothing. The debt grew due to interest, and the despondent Lu eventually hung himself in 1907. His family took over the fantan houses and ran them until their license expired in 1912. Today, Lu Gao's mansion is a tourist attraction in Macau, and one of his many great-grandsons, Bro had 10 wives and 27 children, is the current chairman of the Macau Olympic Committee. In 1930, Macau offered up new monopoly franchise rights for a gambling casino. A company bought that but soon fell into bankruptcy. So in 1937, two gangsters, Gao Hening, the pawn shop king, and Fu Takyong, formed the Taiheng Company and acquired the monopoly license. Their flagship location was the Grand Hotel. It was Macau's first high-rise, towering over the surrounding neighborhood, and it constantly ran live events and concerts to attract gamblers. The hotel appeared in movies and attracted famous guests like Clark Gable and Ian Fleming, the James Bond creator. Fleming mentioned the hotel in his 1959 travelogue, Thrilling Cities. He noted how the girls got more beautiful and the music got better the higher up you went in the hotel. Nevertheless, Fleming called it, quote, the least recommendable place on earth, end quote. The Taiheng Company also pioneered what is called the Jingke, the use of paid recruiters to bring gamblers to their Fantan houses. The pawn shop king Gao used his influence to maintain the monopoly for over 20 years, and the hotel's rooms stayed occupied even throughout the chaos of World War II, thanks in part to Portugal's neutrality in the war. But he was frankly uninterested in running this business. His gangster partner ran the casino's day-to-day operations. Nevertheless, after the two passed away, Gao in 1955 and Fu in 1960, everyone expected their descendants to receive the monopoly license once again. Stanley Ho was born of mixed Dutch-Jewish and Chinese descent in Hong Kong. Ho was born into wealth, but the 1929 stock market crash annihilated the family's fortunes. Two of his brothers ended their own lives. Then in 1941, the Japanese invaded Hong Kong, forcing Ho to flee to the then-neutral Macau. He started making money by running goods through the United Nations blockade on the People's Republic of China during the Korean War. It also taught him the value of schmoozing with the high class. So in 1961, the Macau government put the monopoly license back up on bid. Ho founded a company called STDM, literally meaning the Macau Travel and Amusements Company. And then, with the financial help of Hong Kong tycoon Henry Fok, STDM unexpectedly won the monopoly license with a bid of $410,000. Governor Jaime Silverio Marquez wanted to turn Macau into a gaming destination and turn a page on its former sordid history, so the license carried with it a fixed rental fee plus the requirement to build a casino and luxury hotel. Ho pledged allegiance to these goals, and that's in part why he won the bid. For his first casino, he temporarily converted an old Chinese junk into the Macau Palace, a floating casino. This was later updated, and the new Macau Palace was featured in the Bond movie Man with the Golden Gun. Then in 1962, Ho and STDM opened the Estoril Casino. Shortly before it opened, the Macau government received a telegram from back home in Portugal demanding a stop in all gaming activities. The governor promptly tore it up. There were a few dodgy moments in the late 1960s when violence spilling over from the Cultural Revolution caused protests and violence interrupting the tourism, but then Ho opened the iconic Hotel Lisboa in 1970 and the gambling resumed. For the next 40 years, from 1962 to 2002, Stanley Ho and STDM grew Macau's gambling tourist economy. In 1974, the new governor, Garcia Leandro, demanded a drastically higher license fee. So starting in 1976, STDM started paying the government a portion of its total casino revenues. In 1986, Macau announced that it would extend STDM's monopoly license for another 15 years into 2001. This time, the government not only raised STDM's tax percentage to 30%, but also asked it to co-invest in Macau's infrastructure, transport, and entertainment facilities. Ho paid handsomely for his monopoly, but he benefited handsomely from it too. Gradually, Stanley Ho and STDM made their way into virtually every part of the Macanese economy. STDM owned stakes in Macau's hotels, nightclubs, banks, and department stores. He also controlled 90% of the high-speed jet foils bringing thousands of tourists over from Hong Kong to Macau, a critical choke point for the industry. At one point, 30% of Macau's working people were employed by STDM itself or a company affiliated with it. And like his Macanese kingpin predecessors, Ho built a reputation as a benevolent philanthropist, giving money to hospitals and schools, funding scholarships, and more. In 1996, STDM by itself contributed 65% of the government's total revenue. The phrase circulating around Macau went, "What is good for STDM is good for Macau." But was it? Corruption within Macau's bureaucracy had long existed. It was one of the core reasons behind the leftist riots in the late 1960s. And it was wide-ranging. Traffic police can be bribed with a few Macanese patacas to avoid a ticket, or thousands of dollars can be paid to re-export items from Hong Kong into Europe. In the 1980s, there was a major scandal where the head of the Home Affairs Department issued fake documents for people to obtain Portuguese citizenship, not to mention stories of funds meant for public hospitals being siphoned off, rampant illegal construction and buildings not up to code, human trafficking for massage parlors, and so on. Similar issues plagued Hong Kong too, but while Hong Kong founded the Independent Commission Against Corruption, or ICAC, and successfully suppressed that corruption, Macau's issues survived. We can point to a few reasons for this. One can point to the Portuguese ruling community in Macau, very small, highly intermarried, and comfortable in their positions. Or civil servants that are virtually impossible to fire, combined with a spoils system that incentivizes new top bureaucrats to fill the ranks with their cronies. But perhaps the thing most often cited is the deep, three-way relationship between the Macanese government, the gambling industry, and criminal elements. Throughout his life, Stanley Ho denied any association with organized crime, pointing to a lack of concrete evidence for such. So take what follows with a grain of salt. It's also a little complicated, but bear with me here. Over 70% of Macau's visitors hail from Hong Kong, taking a short ferry ride over for gambling day trips. So in the 1970s, gangsters and Triads bought up all the ferry tickets and resold them at high prices. Visitors hated this, and so STDM struck a deal with the Triads. Don't interfere with the ferry business, and STDM would make a way for the Triads to make money inside the casinos. They introduced a system called junkets. This is an evolution of the Jinke system I mentioned earlier. Roughly speaking, junkets are marketing agents who bring in gamblers to the casinos. The agents pre-sold gambling chips to these customers for use within the casino at a discount, taking a commission on the sale. This essentially ties together the incentives of the casino and the agents, which were basically the Triads. Another big development happened in 1976 when Stanley Ho introduced VIP rooms. These separated the high rollers from the rest of the riffraff and were a major contributor to STDM's success in growing gaming revenues. A few years later, in the mid-1980s, Stanley Ho started informally outsourcing the operations of these VIP rooms to third parties. Such a thing is illegal according to the 1982 Macau gaming law, but nothing was put into writing. In the arrangement, the third party agrees to buy a fixed amount of gambling chips from STDM, 10 million Macanese patacas or something each month. If they can sell 11 million worth of chips, that's great. If they sell 9 million, they're a loss. This incentivizes junkets to bring more gamblers while also limiting STDM's downside. At the same time, the junket system allowed STDM to offer gambling credit through these third parties. This is a major practice in Las Vegas but banned in Macau for STDM. The big problem is how to recover a gambling debt. Courts in mainland China do not recognize or enforce the recovery of debts from Macau. So, for the VIP room subcontractor, being able to secure repayment through other ways was essential. This VIP room subcontractor system helped supercharge casino revenues. Starting in 1985, gross casino revenue grew 10 times over, from $225 million to $2.35 billion over 10 years later, or at about 20% growth each year. But directly involving organized crime rings in the gambling operations had very foreseeable consequences. By the late 1990s, there were over 10,000 individuals working in these gray zone activities. Macau only had 4,300 policemen. not all of them clean. Conflict and violence between the Triads, which usually took place underground, spilled out into the open. The violence dates as far back as 1993, with the gunning down of Hong Kong gangster Chan Yu-hing, or the Tiger of Wan Chai. It triggered a series of wars between the Hong Kong and Macau Triads as the former tried to muscle into Macau. But it really peaked in the final 3 years before the handover. Over 122 people died in the ensuing violence: arsons, shootings, firebombings, kidnappings, and assassinations. The government's attempts to impose peace only triggered more violence. Examples of the violence include the following. In 1996, the vice director of Macau's Gambling Inspection Bureau was shot twice in the back by a motorcycle gunman. Fortunately, he survived. A Hong Kong businessman killed in April 1997 outside the Hyatt Regency Hotel, targeted likely because of his business of bringing in tourists from overseas. A high-profile hijacking of one of the jet foils traveling back to Hong Kong. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were stolen, and particularly infamously, the heads of 2 women found in a bag left behind in a hotel. Contemporary media reports often attributed the violence to the Triads fighting for control over the lucrative VIP rooms, and hired gunmen affiliated with the Chinese military brought in from over the border to fuel the fighting. The most well-known conflict was the one between 14K Triad senior member Eng Wai and his flamboyant former protege, Broken Tooth Wan Kwok Koi. The latter is infamous for making a vaguely autobiographical movie called Casino, shot right on the streets of Macau. He wanted to shoot one scene on the Macau Taipa Bridge, then only one of 2, and without informing anyone closed down the whole bridge from both sides for 2 hours. The police did nothing. The violence made the world news and profoundly hurt Macau's reputation as a tourism spot. This, combined with the damage of the 1997 Asian financial crisis, injured STDM's revenues and the stock price. The fever finally broke in May 1998 when Broken Tooth tried to assassinate the chief of police with a car bomb. Hours later, the colonial government arrested him but struggled to convict him. After 2 trials, he was finally convicted and jailed only a month before the handover. Meanwhile, the Chinese government sent 1,000 policemen in Zhuhai to crack down on the Triads on their side, seizing Broken Tooth's assets, jailing his associates, and ending the crime wave for good. Stanley Ho had been hopeful that he could retain power after the handover. He had always been a talented schmoozer, willing to work with the government on whatever demand they might have. Very early on, he started connecting with high-level party officials in an attempt to get his license renewed. Nevertheless, the new Macau government and its new chief executive Edmund Ho, no relation, ended the monopoly and opened the new gambling concession to 3 potential bidders, including foreign gaming companies. There were 21 applicants. Stanley Ho won one of the 3 concessions through an STDM subsidiary. The other 2 went to Wynn Resorts and Galaxy Entertainment. The new setup allowed for the 3 winners to sign sub-concessions. For instance, Galaxy gave a sub-concession to Sheldon Adelson's Las Vegas Sands, which built the Sands Macau. Wynn gave 1 sub-concession to Melco PBL. And Ho granted sub-concessions to 2 of his 17 children, including his daughter Pansy Ho. There's been a lot of family disputes over STDM control, but at the time of Stanley's death in 2018, Pansy is the new head of the empire. Anyway, all that drastically increased the number of casinos in Macau to some 36 in 2015. Combined with a 2003 arrangement that brought a massive influx of people from the mainland, the Macanese economy has since surged to unprecedented levels. Whatever nostalgic feelings people might have had for the old Portuguese-led administration of Macau, those feelings will forever be tainted by the rampant corruption and violence in those final years. The Portuguese in Macau failed to govern. Perhaps they never really wanted to. Macau's fate had been sealed for years, basically since the 12-3 incident in 1966, and that left its government in a lame duck situation. So the government stepped out, leaving economic governance to a single monopoly, collecting rents on that. But in doing so, they lost control over the situation to the rich, the powerful, and the criminals. The consequences of this dereliction of duty were corruption, violence, and death. Alright everyone, that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, sign up for the Patreon, and I'll see you guys next time.